Gute Woche. And, inspiration to see week after week what it isn't keen to hear another dvarlocha. Okay, so let's go straight to the first question, which the one to the left, this Mezuza dilemma we've discussed before, and I brought it up because this week someone sent me the picture on the right. So just to refresh your memories, what I said was at the time that in this picture to the left, so the doorway is where the person walks through. That's the doorway. The upper part
There's no picture being shared at the moment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. There we go. Share screen options. Share screen options. Share screen. Oh, there we are. No, are you here?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was having trouble earlier with the getting on. Baruch Hashem, it's working. All right, so the upper part over here, above these shelves, I wouldn't call that a doorway. It's just a window. And so to put the mezuzah at the far end over here, which is not really near where you walk through, would not be the right place. So if the narrow part is 10 tefachim high, you'd have to put the mezuzah somewhere just near the top of those 10 tefachim. So that's we've gone through before. Here we have a different story where you have a similar layout. However, the upper part has also got a post. And this was the fellow's question. Do we go according to where the arrow points, the black arrow, or where he's put the orange marker? And according to what we discussed, clearly the place for it is where the orange marker is. That's the right of the doorway, and that's where it belongs. Let's move on. Someone was asking, one of our regular listeners, asking about when you take out the Sefer Torah, which way do you face? And actually, there seems to be a difference between what's done in the United Synagogue, etc., and what's done in Chabad. In Chabad itself, you'll see that it's not so clear. What is written in Masechah Sofrim, that you can see here, quote from the Magen Avraham, in Masechah Sofrim, it says that the Chazan should lift the Sefer Torah when he says Shema, etc. When he says Echad, says Gadlu, he should lift the Sefer Torah. It's a slight lift, but doesn't talk about bowing one direction or the other. Ksos HaShulchan, Reb Chaim Noah points out that the minhag is that at Gadlu, the Chazan turns to face the congregation slightly. If you think of those words, Gadlu Lashem Iti, Lord Hashem together with me, so he's kind of turning to the congregation and calling them to join in with him. So that's the background of turning for Gadlu to first face the congregation somewhat. What exactly did the Rebbe do? Well, I've got 3 sources, and each one's different. And it's not a contradiction. It could have been some years was like this, some years it was like that. So the first source you have is from Rabbi Zeligson's record, and he says when the Rebbe would say Shema Yisrael as Chazan, he would be facing the Kohol. When he said Echad, he would be facing the Oron Kodesh. When he said Gadlu, I guess he continued looking at the Oron Kodesh and he lifted the Sefer Torah. So that's Zeligson's record. In the Hiskashrus, we have a record which says the following. The Rebbe would say all 3, Shema, Echad Elokeinu, and Gadlu, all of them, not like the Kiddush Ashkenazim, where he says part towards the Oron Kodesh and turns around to the congregation. The Rebbe would say all of them facing the Oron Kodesh. So that's the second record. The third record is in a sefer called Maaseh Melech, which purports to a record the Rebbe's Hanhogas, and they write the following. When the Rebbe would be Chazan, he would say Shema Yisrael facing the Kohol. That's similar to what's written by Zeligson. Amiras Echad Elokeinu Lif'omim, sometimes he'd be facing the Kohol, looking towards the north, and sometimes he would be facing Mizrach. By Gadlu, he'd be facing towards the Oron Kodesh and lift the Sefer Torah slide. So it's similar but not identical to what Zadokson writes. So whichever way you do is, I think, is going to be wonderful. And so the idea is that, I guess, somehow you are facing the Oron Kodesh, and then you are turning towards the Kohol at some stage, earlier or later. But there's no clear consensus of what's the Seder. Let's move on. So here one of our listeners are asking about Netilas Yadayim. Now, there's a mitzvah of Netilas Yadayim for davening, etc. And we don't say a bracha when we do Netilas Yadayim for davening, but there certainly is a halacha about Netilas Yadayim, to the degree that there's a discussion in Shulchan Aruch of how far you have to go out of your way in order to obtain water to be able to wash. So the Shulchan Aruch starts off, this is in Siman Tzadik Beis, where he says that the din of having to wash your hands for davening is only if your hands are dirty. But if you don't know that they're dirty, then you don't have to wash them again for davening. There are those who say that you should, if hesach hadas, the fact you haven't been vigilant about your hands being clean, you should have to wash again for davening. Because your hands are always touching here and there and everywhere. And perhaps you touched perhaps you touched a soiled area. So the halacha remains that one should wash one's hands before davening. Now, we saw the Rebbe at the end of the Farbrengen, they would bring the Rebbe a bowl of water, and he would wash, there was a tall glass, and he would wash 3 times before davening mincha. But that is, I think, lifnim mishur sadin. Nadin, wash with water. If you have a keli, is better. Okay, there is the idea of washing your hands before davening. However, if water isn't available, so one should wash hands before davening. If you don't have water available, but you don't know of any soil in your hands, then you can rely on the first tzvara. But then there is an idea of washing your hands, of wiping your hands on a stiff surface, which if there's any grime on your hands, it will come off by wiping it onto that stiff surface. Even if you had been distracted, just cleansing your hands without washing them is also adequate. What's the worry that you might have some soil attached to your hands? And when you wipe your hands on a stiff surface, so then that soil will come off your hands. This is all said for davening. So for learning Torah, it's not imperative that you wash your hands. For davening, one should try to wash your hands. And if in the middle of davening, so here was the question. I'm in the middle of davening and I scratched my head. Is it enough to use a disinfectant spray, or must one wash hands with water? So it would be preferable, but especially, let's say, this was asked by a school teacher. If you're going to start telling every child, every time they start touching somewhere, they have to go and run to the sink, I think your class control is going to be severely undermined, especially with younger children. So if necessary, it's enough just wiping on a hard surface, that would be enough. But before davening, it would be recommended to wash with water. Let's go on to the next question. Every question is entitled to have an answer. Someone asks, do women look at their nails at Havdala? So all I can tell you, I don't even have a source for this, but I can tell you what I've seen over the last 50-something years, that it's not in Chabad. Generally, I have not seen women putting out their hands at Havdala. There may be exceptions to that. That's okay. It's not a clear halacha. I think it's more a sensitivity of a tznius, perhaps. There are men there for a woman to put out her hand. If a woman would be making Havdala on her own, I guess she would put out her hands to benefit from the light of the Havdala candle. But like this, when there are men there, it's the general minhag, at least in Chabad, is that women don't put out their hands to look at them at the Havdala candle. Let's go into something more I was going to say a bit more meaty. So here the question is the following. what is this business of stuff made in a Fleishig oven? Is it Fleishig or is it not Fleishig, etc.? So the person is asking, I have biscuits made in a Milky oven. Are they milchig? Because they're made in a Milky oven, does that make them milchig? So what we want to identify is the concept of nat bar nat, or nusen tam bar nusen tam. There's a first degree and second degree, and this is what we're looking at, nat bar nat. So when you've cooked meat in a keli, so then that keli becomes Fleishig. When you cook something parv in that keli, so then that's called nusen tam bar nusen tam, in short, nat bar nat. So let's read that inside. This is we've got two sources in Shulchan Aruch. One is in Simin Peites, Yeridea, and the other one is in Tzadik Hey. So let's read carefully. Mihu im ein bosse betavshel. There's a dish which is cooked, where there's just potatoes, let's say. Reaction is bashel b'kdei shel basar. This, you've got cooked parve potatoes in a Fleishig pot. And then you ate those potatoes. Muter lechel acharov vino. You are allowed to eat cheese after those potatoes. There's no need to be machmir or waiting for a, shall we call it, second degree or 2 degrees removed of nat bana. Those potatoes cooked in a clean Fleishig keli, those potatoes do not become Fleishig, and therefore if you eat them, you don't become Fleishig, or the other way around with milchik also. So, but then let's read the second source, and that's the Siman Tzadik Hey. Beitzo shenis bashlo b'mayim b'kdei rocheleves. What happens if an egg was boiled in water in a milchik pot? Losses oiso b'toichat harnegeles. So mutter losses oiso b'toichat harnegeles. You can take that egg, which was cooked in a milchik saucepan. You can take that egg and you can put it inside a chicken, like to fill it somehow. If the egg had been boiled with meat, mamish, then you wouldn't be allowed. Then that's the Shulchan Aruch, but then the Rama. V'yesh machmirin b'tzliyo uvisho, lesser noisen tam bar noisen tam. There are those who take the view that a second degree, which we've called nat bar nat, it's the egg which was cooked in a Fleishig pot, in a milchik pot. So there's milk into the pot, and now the pot into the egg. It's 2 degrees removed, two step phases removed. That's called nat bar nat. Now those who are machmir that you should not put it in the chicken. So again, the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo had said that this egg is so parv that you are allowed to put it into a chicken. The Ramos says no. L'chatchila, we should view this egg, which was cooked in a milchik saucepan, we should view it as slightly milchik, and not put it into this stuffing this chicken. And that remains indeed the minhag, that when we bake stuff, cook stuff in a Fleishig pot, so l'chatchila we avoid using that mamish with the opposite type. If it's a shas adchak or something, one would be make, or sometimes I've had the situation where someone has, let's say there's a woman who gave birth, and another woman was asked to make supper for them. And so this woman makes pasta, the other one makes the protein, another one and they put it together. Well, the one who made the pasta made it in milchik, and the other one, and so what's going to happen with all that pasta? It's a big family that we're making for. So when there would be a bit of a shas adchak or something, one wouldn't need to throw it out. But l'chatchila, when you're cooking pasta to be served with Fleishig, it should be in a parve pot, not in a milchik pot. Okay, I'm going to look at the chats. There's a couple of questions that have come in. So number one, what about women making Havdala for women? All right, it's a side question, but let's address it. In other circles, not Chabad, they are very cagey, very uneasy about women making Havdala. And Alter Rebbe, one doesn't see that. if there's no men around, a woman can make Havdala, that's not a problem. And then she would also make Havdala with very maid or ish, etc. Where there is a difference is that a woman hasn't heard Havdala. A man would not be allowed to make Havdala just for a woman, because the achrayas of a man, there's a suffix whether a woman has a chiyuv of Havdala or not. So for a man who's already been yotze Havdala to make Havdala again for a woman, that becomes a problem. But for women to make Havdala for themselves, and that's okay. Someone's asking, does the Mechaber use the example of putting the egg into a chicken rather than into meat? Which is more a shayla deiraisa. I don't know. In other words, in any case, we wouldn't do it. Yeah. So let's read another question here. What about something parva made in Milky and parva made in Meaty? So here's the question: what happens if you've got two second degree Milky and a second degree Fleishig? Could you bring them together? Probably that would be okay, but we try to keep them separate. Let's move on. So now, here I've got the question. Shliach, he's got Friday night, he's got a big meal, and then the floor also gets its share of the meal, and the next morning he needs the same room for davening. So he has a non-Jewish cleaner who will come in either Friday night or Shabbos morning, earlier on in the morning, to tidy up the room. Now, instead of using a broom, the cleaner chooses to use the vacuum cleaner. Is that a problem? Do I need to stop her? So let's read this halacha carefully. It is a very common question. So here we have two sources in the Alter Rebbe in Siman Reish Ayin Vav. Here, this is the lower passage, it's from Siftes. There's something called Piltul min hatzad, an indirect movement. And so muksa, you could ask a guy to move muksa, because you would be allowed to move the muksa in an indirect way. Therefore, the fact that you ask a guy to move it in a normal way, that doesn't matter, because you're only not allowed to ask a guy something which there's no way you could do it. So here he says that, but then he finishes off. To ask the goy to move something which you're not allowed to move, this should only be shared with Bnei Torah. So he says that you shouldn't share this heter because people will take it further and further. So here he said, even though you could have done it in a way of heter, and the goy is choosing to do it in a way of iser, he says it's in adin, it's okay, but don't share this. This shouldn't be publicized. Now then, let's take a look and see if you'd base. You got the maid. She's washing the dishes, and she is switching on a candle. She's lighting a candle in order to be able to see the washing the dishes. She's washing the dishes for the Yid. We don't say she's lighting the candle for the Yid. You're not benefiting from this candle or from the dishes either. She's got a job to wash the dishes. Okay. So she's lighting the candle to make life easier for herself. So that's okay. So now we've got two very similar situations. One is that you've told the guy to wash the dishes, and the guy switches on a light. And there he seems to be quite okay, to the point that you can even have benefit from that candle. And the second, in the earlier quote, which is Siftes in the lower part of the page, is not very happy about it. And he says, you shouldn't have the guy doing your jobs in a forbidden way, because it's going to be confusing and people will start being maker. So looking at this carefully, the difference is the following. When you ask the guy to do a dvar heter, a permitted activity, and they switch on the light to be able to do it better, you didn't tell them to switch on the light. You asked them to wash the dishes. The light is nothing to do with it. What if I told them to bring chairs from the downstairs to the top floor? So instead of carrying them up the stairs, they put in the lift and they switch on and they go up with the lift. Let's say, whatever it may be. So here they are doing my actual shlichus. They're doing my actual bidding in a forbidden way. So that's the difference. The Sif Yud Beis is saying, I've asked them to wash the dishes, and she's switching on the light. That's a side issue. That's okay. No restraint on that. Sif Tes is saying, I've asked them to do a job of moving something, and I could have done it in a permitted way, and they're doing it in a forbidden way. That's not advised. So coming back to our question, could you ask a goy to clean the room, and they're taking a vacuum cleaner? So that's more comparable to Sif Tes, where he says this should be only taught to Bnei Torah and not to Amei Haaretz, because otherwise it's going to get Amir al-Nochri is going to become a daily thing. Every Shabbos. Now then we have here a piece in Kaf HaChaim. In Kaf HaChaim, this is in Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, which is Sephardi, obviously, and he writes the following: in Eretz Mitzrayim, in Egypt, the custom was that the Goyshe maid or whatever servant would wash the floor, the tiled floor on Shabbos, and he would also squeeze out the mop with which he wipes the floor, so that he squeezes it out and then he absorbs more water in the mop, and he mops the floor. So the guy is doing mopping, which is not allowed on Shabbos. And he says one could be Melamed Zchus because he's doing Adaita Denafshi, he's doing it to make life easier for himself, because really he could wash the floor with lots of water. And they would, in Israel, it's very common, they've got what they call the sponja or magav, they've got this rubber fin. So what the Kaf HaChaim is saying, since he could have used he could have used he could have used some other sweeper, a straw broom or something, but he wants to use a mop because it makes it easier, whatever. So then he says one can allow this. Now, what he's saying is basically, in a way, a little bit contradicting what we just saw in the Alter Rebbe. Again, the goy is doing your bidding in a forbidden way, and he's saying that they used to do it there in Mitzrayim. He says because they had an alternative to do it in a permitted way by using a rubber fin or of sorts. So that's his justification. So according to the Alter Rebbe, that's not so poshut. Better let them be living in blissful ignorance rather than telling them they're not allowed to, and they'll continue doing this. So we got this Kaf HaChaim who seems to be quite tolerant of what's going on, of asking the guy to clean the floor, and the guy cleans the floor with a mop. So now again, the Alter Rebbe does not seem to be happy about it. Kaf HaChaim is more lenient, perhaps here because it's a communal facility, one can be more lenient. Now, then, they mentioned this last night, I gave it a shiur in Shul, and one of the Rabbanim there raised a question. There's a whole business which is called Avsho Milsa. It's creating a noise. So let's come back to our question, and then we'll come back to this Avsho Milsa. Is it okay for the cleaner to take the vacuum cleaner? So you've told her to sweep the floor, and she's decided to use it with the vacuum cleaner. It doesn't seem to be such a strict issue because she could have done it in a derech heter. Here we have a whole discussion about putting wheat grain into a mill, and the mill keeps on turning automatically. So the first shitta here, this is simulation on base, you are allowed to put grains of wheat into a mill before Shabbos, and it continues grinding. It belongs to you. And people hear the mill grinding because people know that mills grind on their own. They won't suspect that you've done it on Shabbos. There are those who disagree with this. The others object to this where there is a noise which is produced by the melacha. If there's a noise which is being produced by this activity, then that's not okay. Because it's a disgrace for Shabbos. People, it's not saying it's a violation, but it's a disgrace for Shabbos. People will get the impression that Shabbos started on Shabbos. So here we have a new concept that if it's producing a noise, if the activity, even though it may be permitted per se, but if it's producing a noise, then it's not appropriate for Shabbos. Le'inyan halacha, the mokim, so I'm skipping the whole arichas. If there's no established minhag to allow it, then one can rely on the second, on the later. One should follow the strict svara, not to allow the mill to continue on Shabbos, unless there is a loss involved. Then you can rely on the first svara. So coming back to the vacuum cleaner, I know the vacuum cleaner is, in a sense, is actually worse. Here we're talking about a mill which was working from before Shabbos and it continues grinding into Shabbos, and we have a problem of the noise being a zilzal Shabbos. Here we have an actual guy is actually switching it on Shabbos, and so people are hearing the vacuum cleaner working on Shabbos. So it does look like a zilzal of Shabbos. So not very happy about it. What should I say? All right, let's look at the couple of comments here in the chat. So does the hoovering on the floor apply to private homes too? If she chooses to move without me, so must you stop her? So what we're seeing here is that there's certainly one should stop her. Yes, it's not appropriate that in a Yiddish house there should be the noise of a vacuum cleaner being emitted on Shabbos. Yeah. Right. Let's move on. Right, last week we had a discussion about the Chazan who goes back 3 steps, and he doesn't go back 3 steps at the end of Shemona Esra because he relies on the 3 steps at the end of Kaddish Tiskabel. And we said last week that if there is for some reason a switchover of Chazonim by Ashur of Holotziyun, then the Chazan who stepped down from the Yomid, he should then, at that point, he should take 3 steps back, or perhaps right after Shemona Esra, but he would have to have his 3 steps back, and he can't rely on the Kaddish and the 3 steps of the one who takes out. But then I've mentioned last week that if a person, you forgot Ya'aleh v'Yavai, and he's using the Chazor Sashat as his private Shemona Esra, so then it says in Shulchan Aruch he has to go back 3 steps, and he can't rely on the ones at the end of Kaddish. And I don't understand why. If for regular Chazor Sashat, you can rely on the 3 steps at the end of Kaddish Tiskabel, why can't you rely on the same 3 steps when you forgot the Ya'aleh v'Yavai and it's for your own Shemona Esra? So the Alter Rebbe doesn't spell out the reason, but the Alter Rebbe is quoting from the Levush, and the Levush does go a little bit more in detail, and he says, even though you have the Kaddish Shalom ahead of you, now let's go back, this concept, this halacha, that the Chazan who forgot Ya'aleh v'Yavai and is using the Chazor Sashatz for his own Shemona Esra, he has to take 3 steps back, that is traced back to the Zman HaGo'in. Goes back 1,000 years plus, it's on record. Question is, what's the reason for that? So the Levush says that first you have to do, if you viewed the Chazor Sashatz for your own Shemona Esra, then you have to first take leave, so to speak, from Hashem for your own prayers. And then once you've kind of taken leave on behalf of your own prayers, then you'll come in and you'll say, take leave, so to speak, on the prayers which you said for the tzibur. So that's what he's saying, that as a chazan going back, he's on behalf of the tzibur, but if he has his own tefillah, then he has to step back for his own tefillah. Okay. In the Levush, there's a commentary by the Tosfos Yom Tov. This is called Kamal Busha Yom Tov. This is not an Negela Maisa, it's just a Pilpula B'Yalma, and he really is not very impressed with the whole thing. This business that there's a chazan and he's relying on the Kaddish after the 3 steps after Tiskabel, but when he's davening his own, he has to take his own steps. He says the whole thing is a bit, how do you say, not so. He's not very impressed. And then he brings a different reason, that in the Bes Yosef he says that really once the chazan has taken 3 steps back for his own tefillah, really he doesn't need to step 3 steps back altogether. He's saying that the chazan doesn't need to take 3 steps back. That's it. The fact that he goes after Kaddish, that's because of Kaddish, but not because of Shemona Esra. So this is what he's saying, that that the Chazor Sashaz doesn't require 3 steps back. That's his point. But okay. Right. Let's go back to the chats. Right. Right. Someone's mentioning about if the goy is using hot water. Using hot water is actually my least problem, because the issue of using hot water on Shabbos is because it's going to activate the boiler. And that is an indirect cause. It's called psikresha. Therefore, to tell the guy to use hot water, and I'm not worried about that at all. It's like asking the guy to open the door of the fridge and you know the light's going to go on. That's okay. That's okay. But let's go on. How about where the cleaner mops without being asked? She sees this as part of her job. Yeah, but she's a part of her job. She's doing it for you. You see what we saw, that if it's a shas chak, we've seen that there's a mokin lahati. We can go back to those lashonos. We're not talking about after milta. Because here, especially if there's someone who's unwell. For a choyle, for sure, you can bring in the heter of amir l'nochrin. So there's someone who's unwell, one can be mekel, and that's why I was also not so worried about for a tzibur. You can say it's called tzorchi tzibur. No, it's not so clear. Okay, right. Let's move on. Let's go on to the next point. Now, last week, unfortunately, the Zoom went down for a little, and I think it was these two questions. And so, if you did hear it, I apologize. And if you didn't hear it, well, I'm addressing. So, someone asked about Mezuza-cases. Do Mezuza-cases need to be put in sheimos or in geniza in Oron Kodesh? So here we have a clear halach in Siman Kuf Nun Daled, where he talks about Tashmish Kedusha. You've got Kedusha, which is Hashem's name, is written on a piece of parchment. That's Kedusha. Tashmish Kedusha means the appurtenances which are serving the holy items. So we have here Tuksha Sforim, a cover for holding Sforim, a cover for Mezuzah, the straps of the tefillin, the bima for the Sefer Torah. And he says all of these, Yesh Bohen Kedusha, all of them do have Kedusha, and if they are out of commission, then they should be put in geniza. So a Mezuza case should be put in geniza. The other point which I discussed last week is about burial of sheimos, and so that was one of my contacts. He was under the impression that burial of sheimos is similar to the burial of a nifter, where we say alofa atov, alofa toshuv, that there is an ideal that it should decompose. And I told him it's actually just the opposite. With a nifter, barminon, so then there is the idea that the body should be allowed to decompose. But when we're talking about sheimos, so then we dafke put them in a protected container, and there's two madregas and the two levels in this. If it's something like mezuzahs and tefillin, so they will be put in in the Shulchan talks about putting them in a earthenware container. Nowadays they'll use a strong and sturdy plastic, which will be able to withstand seepage, etc. And other sforim, etc. We're more lenient, and we're allowed to bury them, but it should be buried in plastic bags. And what I've seen is, even if you're putting your sheimos into one of these large skips, which they take away the sheimos and bury it, it's ideal that you should put everything in plastic bags, because those who deal with it don't necessarily put everything in plastic bags. So you should put them in plastic bags to protect the sheimos, that they shouldn't be directly exposed to moisture, which will then ruin the Hashem's name, which is written in the on those texts, etc. Okay. Now, again, one of our regular listeners, he listens to the recording, but he asked me to clarify what's going on with the 3 steps back. Which way, when you go 3 steps back, which way do you bow, to the left or to the right? So let's read. This is from somewhere around there. Okay. When you step back, you first bow to your left. You bow to your left, and the reason why you bow to your left, because you are facing the Hashem's presence, and so you're bowing to the right of the Shekhinah. Once you bow to the left, then you bow to your right, which is the left of the Shekhinah. So when you say Oisa Shalom B'Mroimo, you are bowing to the left, and when you say Hu Yasa Shalom Aleinu, you'll bow to the right, and yeah, okay. You step back, your 3 steps, and as you already step your 3 steps back, then to your left and then to your right. Then he adds also about bowing forward. Right. So the left to the right and then forward. That's the minhag which is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. Now, then comes the second quote is from Sefer HaMinhagim, and that's why there's, I suspect, why this fine fellow got confused. In Sefer HaMinhagim, it says at the end of Kaddish, you bow. You bow to the right, who in the middle, and Yasa Shalom Aleinu to the left, and the end of it you bow straight forward. So here we've got a clear change between bowing at the end of your own Shemona Esrei and bowing at the end of Kaddish. By your own Shemona Esrei, you're bowing to the Yamin HaShechina first. When you're saying Kaddish, you're bowing to the Yamin HaTzibur and to the left Kivyachal of the Shechina. I have a source somewhere, that an idea that Koved HaTzibur somehow becomes an even greater value than Koved HaShechina. And therefore, you're bowing to the right of the Tzibur rather than the right of the Shechina Kivyachal. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, but that's the difference. In your Osh Shemona Esrei, you are bound to start off to the right of the Shechina, which is your left, and at Kaddish you bow to your right, which is the right of the Kohol, which is the left of obviously of the Shechina in front of you. In this itself, there are different minhagim because this is the way it's recorded in the Sefer Minhagim. But we know that the Rebbe himself was no different to what is recorded here. It would be Oiseh Shalom Bimraimov rather than Oiseh Shalom Bimraimov who has a Shalom Leinu. So there is the idea of right and left, but the actual position, which words are said in which position, the Rebbe did different to the way it's written in Sefer Minhagim. And if someone asks me, which way should you do? So I'll say, whichever way you do, you're a tzaddik. If you are a Kabbalah Soilnik, you'd say that do what's written in Sefer Minhagim. That's the instructions. If you are a Mekusher, more in Av or more than Yira, so then you do what the Rebbe did. Whichever you're doing fine. Let's look at the couple of points over here. Right. Why do we bow to the right and then to the left by Lachodoidi? Okay. I have a whole article about this. When you go, well, Bichlal, you should be maktim. You should be first dealing with the right and then to the left. By the Chodoidi, you turn around to the back of the shul, and you first bow to the right, then you bow to the left, and that's all in a circular motion. In earlier years, apparently, the Rebbe would turn around by the Chodoidi clockwise, and the years which I remember, he actually turned around anti-clockwise, and he would turn around, as is in his place, he would turn around to his left, looking towards the Oron Kodesh. And if you're taking the anti-clockwise motion, then you first come to the right, and then you come to the left, if you think about it carefully. This whole geschäft about which way to turn is actually discussed in Shulchan Aruch about the Kohanim. When they go up for duchening, and they're standing in front of the Oron Kodesh, and they should turn around to face the kohol to give the brachas. And we have the expression called poinos shata poino lo yuel yomin. When you turn, you should turn to the right. And here there's a fascinating biur of the Tzemach Tzedek, which says that when you turn to the right, if you would turn on the spot to the right, you're going to step back with your right foot. If you're going to turn to your left, you're going to step forward with your right foot. I'm assuming that you're using your right foot for the first step. So again, if you're turning to your right clockwise, you're going to step backwards with your right foot. If you're turning to the left, you're going to be stepping you're going to step forward. So the Tzemach Tzedek has the interessante, he assesses the following: better forward to the left than backwards to the right. That's the Tzemach Tzedek's take on it. And there are different places the Tzemach Tzedek about this. A few places he talks about this, but that seems to be what the Rebbe was following in the later years, which I remember. He would, by Chodoidi, turn to the left. And as I say, when you're already facing the back of the shul, bowing to the right would be sooner than bowing to the left. There you go, Allah Seder, rather than Ma'avir La Mitzvahs. Let's go down further on the chat. We were told that for Kaddish Yosim, you bow to the right first. Yes, so it's when it's Kaddish Yosim or anything which you're doing on behalf of the Tzibur. The Kaddish Yosim is really a Tzibur act. It's just that we're given the privilege to the Yosim to say it for the schus of the Nifter, but it's a Tzibur act, and therefore it bows to the right. You may notice also in Chabad, the minhag when you have Aliyah L'Torah. So by Aliyah L'Torah, you bow slightly to the right, although the Ramos says you should bow to the left. So we've got a few places where we bow to the right when you are acting on behalf of the kohol. Finally, what do you mean the right of the kohol? He is not facing them. No, the Chazan is in front of the kohol, is representing the kohol. So therefore, he is, when he bows to the right, is the right of all the people behind him, of the whole kohol. They're all looking towards Mizrach. So when he bows to his right, it's the right of the kohol. Let's move on. Right. Someone asked me this week question. Someone's getting a donation of a Sefer Torah, beautiful. And someone had told him that you shouldn't write that Sefer Torah is a matana. You should write it's a nedova, but not write it's a matana. And he asked me for some clarity on that. And I really didn't know what he's talking about. I did do a little bit of research. There is a business in Shulchan not to give a Sefer Torah as a matana to another person. Reuven should have given a Sefer Torah as a matana, like you shouldn't sell a Sefer Torah unless you're desperate, etc. You shouldn't give a Sefer Torah as a matana unless there's very special reasons. But people giving a matana to a shul, I don't think that comes into it. But what I would want to say is that when a person has the schus and he writes a Sefer Torah, so one should not be giving the Sefer Torah to the shul. Rather, they should loan it to the shul. The reason being that there's a mitzvah ksiva Sefer Torah. If I wrote a Sefer Torah and then gave it away, so then I don't have the mitzvah anymore. I've given it away. I mean, they asked the question. Let's say if a person wrote a Sefer Torah and tragically there was a streifa, it was destroyed. Do they have to do it again? So is the mitzvah to write the Sefer Torah, the mitzvah to have a Sefer Torah which you have written, to own it? So therefore, this is what you see here, and there's a whole sefer from Rabbi Gavriel Tzina, Nita Gavriel. It's got a whole volume on Achnosa Sefer Torah, and he's saying here that that when you give a Sefer Torah, you should not give it as an outright gift. You should be giving it to the kehillah, that they should be allowed to use it. And as a result, it means also technically that if at a later stage the true owner would want to take it back, they would be allowed to. I seem to remember, I didn't find it, I seem to remember somewhere that Rebbe recommending someone to draw up some kind of contract even. But I looked for that and I couldn't find it, but probably someone will share that with us at a later stage. Let's move on. But there is this idea that it should not be, you shouldn't give the Sefer Torah to the shul, it should be a loan to the shul. Right. Finally, we have our last question. Gone through our list quite quickly this time. Okay, so last week we had a story about if you remember, there was a patio and there were 4 doors overlooking a swimming pool. And I mentioned then the Shulchan Aruch, quoted the Shulchan Aruch, which says that if there's no doorpost in between, if there is a doorpost, there's no hinges. Here you have the Shulchan Aruch and Resh Pevov. If there's a there's a doorway, and it's been divided with an omud. If the hinges divide the doors from one another, then they need 2 mezuzahs. But if the hinges are to the far ends and the middle, there's no hinges there, then the post doesn't divide them because it's just there for ornamental purposes. So he's asking, bang his luck. Well, he's got here, and this is on the left of the picture, he's got here 3 panels. The middle panel is actually rigid, it doesn't move at all. The 2 outer panels both open, and he's asking, well, since there's no hinge towards the center, does it require 2 mezuzahs, or is it all one Pesach? I felt that it's a bit stretched to say that a separation of a meter of a solid glass should still be called all one doorway. There he's talking about you have a double door, and in the middle there's a post. Now he says, okay, but it's all one doorway. Some even say that the two doors, when they close, they cover the post. But here, I think they are clearly two separate doorways, and therefore would need to have two mezuzahs. So this was one communication, and the other one, someone asked the following. Someone's asked the following. This is the balcony overlooking. I have no idea. People send me emails. You have no idea where it is. It looks like a nice place. And what the story here is, and I'm sharing this because it's a very common mistake. We have here 3 panels. In this case, it's the middle panel which moves. You can see the handle on the. You can see on the picture. You can see the handle. It's only this one which moves. These outer ones, they're rigid. They don't move at all. So where does the mezuzah belong? Does the mezuzah belong at the far end of this whole glass doorway, or does it belong just by the gap where you walk through? And as I've made it very clear, I think, so far, that a glass wall is a wall, and therefore the mezuzah doesn't belong at the far end. It belongs at the right of the doorway, of where you walk through. As you walk through, you should be able to touch the mezuzah right within it. It should be within a tefach of where you walk through. The other question, though, which this doorway asks, or it raises the question, is which side should the mezuzah be placed? Should it be facing, the mezuzah has to be on the right as you enter. So you can enter the house to the balcony, or can enter from the balcony to the house. So which way should the mezuzah go? So as I mentioned before, the concept of heker, the way the door swings. So if this door would swing inwards, if this door was not a sliding door, but it actually swings into the house, well, that would tell you that the mezuzah should be put on the right as you come from the balcony to the house. If it would swing out to the balcony, then we'd put the mezuzah on the right as you go from the house to the balcony. That's Minhag Chabad. In other minhagim, I know that there are going to be a different psukim on that. The story here, though, is that this is actually not a swinging door, it's a sliding door. So I have used the psak of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, when he says, when you've got a track, and the track is going to be either on one side, it's either on the inside of the fixed panels, or it's going to be outside of the fixed panels. So the Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, just like the room where the hinge is placed is called the interior, similarly, the room where the track is placed, that's called the interior. So I think my impression is that in this case, actually, the track is on the inside of the outer of these 2 panels, in which case the mezuzah would be on the right as you come from the balcony to the house. Now, of course, you're going to ask a question: how do you get to the balcony? It looks like quite high up. That's a good question on the whole Chabad halachic heker, but that's the Minhag Chabad. We'll come in more detail in a moment. I see here in Shabbos from Karasik, he has a section why women don't look at their nails during Havdala. Oh, thank you, Rabbi Singer. Going back to what we had earlier about women not looking at their nails at Havdala, there's a 2-volume set by Rav Yosef Karasik. Yosef, not Yosef Yitzchok, his great Zed was Isaac. And he says, you say that he addresses this question over there. Thank you. And Bez Hashem, I'll add the reference to the sources when I send out for after Shabbos. No, for later for the recording. Okay. So now here this is a letter of the Rebbe where he says that Holchin Achar Heker Tzir Vafilu Benidoin Ka'oise Shemetar Yatzia Balkon. That when we would follow the dictate of the Heker Tzir, the way the door swings, even on a balcony, where the only way you can get to the balcony effectively is from one of the rooms. And the question again is, how do you get there? So the answer is you climb through the roof, whatever. And Rabbi Lando from Bnei Barak apparently has explicit directives from the Rebbe Rashav about that. Derech Agav, the Rebbe writes to this person, Gamba ha-balkon, though you're familiar with 770, so as you come from the street to the right of 770, there is the an open area. That's where the sukkah is placed over sukkahs. And there is a balcony jutting out, where the chuppahs are usually done there also sometimes. So there's a balcony jutting out. And that's the balcony from the apartment of the Fleishig Rebbe on the second floor, 770. In English, we call it the first floor. And the Rebbe is saying that the mezuzah over there was placed the way it was placed, according to the way the heketzir is. I don't remember now which way it swings, inwards or outwards. But the Rebbe is saying that the psak of that mezuzah was according to heketzir, and that's where he's basing this. That would go according to heketzir for even on a balcony. Right. I think that's it for today. Yeah. All right. So that's it. We finished a little bit early. I wish you all a gute Woche and alles soll sein gesund. And those who are not well should have a refuah shlema. B'teich sh'ar kochel Yisrael. Baras gufa nohira ma'alya. Kultiv.
Amen.
Good Lord.
Good Lord.
Gute Woche.
Good Lord.